It's a real shame that we're not able to include footage of all the presentations that were given in Dubai, as the speaker list for the 3 days really did read as a who's who in tall buildings internationally. Some of the speakers that we're not able to include in this footage are showing on some of the title slides playing here. The intention of this chapter of the DVD is to give a brief snippets from a small number of some of the highlighted presentations. First up was Dr. Ken Yeang, who's well known to us at the Council and been a supporter of the Council for many years. Ken took us through some of his seminal green skyscraper work from the past 2 or 3 decades and left us with some of the projects that are currently on the drawing board in his office, which bode well for the future and the challenges that face us in sustainability. Professor Werner Sobek of Werner Sobek Ingenieure in Germany gave us a fascinating insight as to what structural engineers can be doing to add to this cause of sustainability. And Gary Lawrence of Arup Limited talked to us about some of the projects that Arup are doing around the world in creating new sustainable cities of the future, specifically the Dongtan Eco City project near Shanghai and others.
How about greening the skyscraper? Biodiversity is extremely effective because in nature you have both organic components and inorganic components, or in fact in ecosystems defined as biotic components and abiotic components acting together to form a whole. Now if you look at a building like what we have now here, everything in this building is inorganic. The only thing that's organic is you and me and the bacteria and the bugs. And so if you keep building like this, the whole world becomes increasingly artificial. So the idea of putting vegetation buildings was something that intrigued me, and I started looking at different ways of doing this. And so this little diagram shows you can put all the vegetation in one location, and then sky plots, which are called juxtapositioning, or you can have a much more spotty relationship, like intermixing, or you can have integrated relationships. You can see the bottom right-hand diagram. From the ecologist's point of view, the bottom right-hand diagram is the preferred one because it enables species migration, and it enables better interaction between species, and engenders a habitat with greater resources for sharing between the species, and therefore generates a much more diverse and stable ecosystem. Now this image is also emblematic for me because I believe that the skyscraper or the building of the future, the green building of the future, will not look like a conventional autonomous building. It will be fuzzy, it will be hairy, it will be integration of organic and inorganic mass.
Focusing a little bit on facades, I would have a closer look on this building, which is also remarkable because it has no core. It is a composite structure with concrete slabs. But the 2 buildings are totally independent because the clients wanted to sell them independently. We showed a special feature here, these more or less transparent bridges, which are clip-on, clip-off bridges. Means they are hung in between the 2 buildings and they can be replaced by a crane depending on the owner's ideas or demands. The building themselves now becomes critical how it works. As I already said, they have no core. They are very, very lightweight. I think here we went to the border to the limit of what you can do using composite structures. Each of the building has 2 U-channeled truss systems which are responsible to take the horizontal load. In between them there are a couple of gravity columns which can be done relatively slender so that the structure itself does not show any obstacle on the floor level. So sitting here on the one hand, you could look for 70 meters without having any obstacles. So this allows for a lot of flexibility. It allows a lot of transparency. And if we talk about transparency, I would like to focus a little bit more in detail on the facade itself. This is the one end of the building, and you see here the diagonals of this U-type truss channel, which is responsible for taking the horizontal loads. And this is the facade, which is a triple glazing. And elementized facade of that size. This is a stainless steel cladding with horizontal slots, and behind those horizontal slots there are operable windows. So everybody can open the window independent from the weather situation, because the slots are designed in such a way that even if you have a heavy wind loading, the wind does not blow your paperwork away.
Political, but the issue of finding successful ways to create livable communities in which people's behaviors will actually change in order to address climate consequences requires that we think not just in terms of technology, but we understand the issues of nostalgia and fear and aspiration, all of which are major players in determining people's willingness to change their behaviors in order to adapt. There is a huge information deficit in the community about these kinds of questions, a variety of other kinds of deficits. But I think the primary deficit is on the part of the design profession in not recognizing all of these human attributes that have to be served if people are going to be willing to make the steps necessary to create a more sustainable future. And we think of sustainability not as an end, but as a means. The only legitimate end of all of our endeavors is to optimize conditions for human development over time. Sustainability is an analytical framework and a decision-making tool that allows us to think in depth and in breadth at the intersection of issues and through time in order to work on these optimization strategies. As we're worried about these carbon issues in communities and both mitigating the effects of our behaviors in increasing greenhouse gases and also mitigating the consequences or adapting our communities to the inevitable consequences of change, we have to get much smarter about the human side.
Perhaps the best non-plenary session, certainly judging by delegate feedback, occurred on day 3 of the Congress and was entitled Alternative Design Thinking. We'd intentionally convened 4 of the world's most famous architects, certainly in the high-rise field, with the intention of getting across to the audience some of the alternative ways that tall buildings are being developed, designed, and what is underpinning that. The first speaker was Hani Rashid of Asymptote Architects in the US. Hani took us on a veritable global journey, showing some of the iconic sculptural tall buildings that his studios created in cities from America to Malaysia. Second was Ken Shuttleworth of Make Architects in the UK, formerly of Foster & Partners. Ken's work was no less inspiring than the work Hani Rashid had shown us. And Ken had an additional agenda in his work, which was clearly typified in the title of his paper, which was Form and Skin, Antidotes to Transparency. Ken is a firm believer that we should no longer be building all-glass towers in many places around the world. The third speakers in this seminal session were Simon Allford and Paul Monaghan of Allford Hall Monaghan Morris in the UK, who took us through several of the projects that is changing the entire urban landscape in provincial cities in the UK, such as Liverpool and Leeds. Their Unity project in Liverpool is worthy of deserved mention for what it does to the Liverpool skyline. And the fourth speaker was Jeanne Gang of Studio Gang in Chicago, who gave us an insight to the design ideas behind her Aqua Tower, this incredible morphing tower in Chicago, and several other ambitious projects. This was clearly one of the best sessions of the Congress, and the question and answer and discussion session that followed embraced many people and epitomized some of the best aspects of the Congress and what people had got out of it.
The first building I'm just going to show quickly is proposal for the DIFC. It was something we did in collaboration with the Duan Associates and Arup Hong Kong. This is a building that really was meant from our design point of view to create a kind of spectacular presence. What would in fact a kind of Eiffel Tower of our time be for a place like Dubai? If Dubai in fact is a kind of crossroad now, cultural and sort of economic engine as it is, could there be a building, an iconic building that stands up against all the iconic buildings that are going up all the time here? And it's not necessarily just a question of height, it's a question also of a kind of cultural, let's say, DNA and a kind of let's say, reverberation that the project can have in the city space. We began the process really in the project by essentially stacking and binding 4 towers, 4 very slender towers that in fact would bundle around a kind of glass core, and that glass core would be held in place kind of almost metaphysically up above the city of Dubai. The idea was really that we could somehow produce an elegant solution, both engineering-wise and architecturally, by bringing these 4 towers into close proximity, using a kind of inclined elevator system and cores to come up into a body of a building that could then sort of reach up into the sky at a very, very spectacular height.
As all supplies decrease and becomes more expensive, I think it's more important that we do actually face up to it. And a lot of this comes through the external wall of the building. So at Make, as far as we're concerned, it's not a sort of greenwash. We don't just apply sustainability or low energy as a bolt-on goodie. It's actually part of the design process. So looking back, before air conditioning, this is one of the work we did with Atelier 10. Buildings were very solid, high thermal mass, designed to be sort of naturally ventilated to respond to the environment. And the buildings were sort of very, in a way, solid with punch windows. They actually had quite a sort of good, in a way, good engineering solution to the environmental side of it. It had no insulation, but they actually got, in terms of the shading and the thermal mass, it mostly right. And I think the engineers, the mechanical, electrical building association, this is your moment. This is your moment where we're going to take you seriously. And if we're not as architects taking you seriously, then we don't deserve to be architects. So I think as an engineer, you've got to biff the architect, you've got to get your confidence back and make the architects work with the engineers and work with it, which is maybe we've been doing. And we're not going back to Georgian times, not going back to boxes with punch windows. We're looking at cladding in a way that transforms itself. It's fantastic Isha drawings, the design changes as you go around the building, almost without noticing. And the final image is, this is a kilometre high. It's not too far from here. One day, potentially, you can jump from the top of one to the other, don't actually quite touch. And basically, for me, it kills the glass box. It changes the idea of the box. It changes the idea of it all being glass. It makes it into a form that is a sort of exploration of the way we should be designing modern architecture of the 21st century. Thank you very much.
So London has a strange context. We have to explore it in a section. And we have this extraordinary set of relationships where, to the right, you have the outline of Renzo Piano's shaft, and the Tate model in the distance. And then a small tower suggesting 18 stories, a residential tower, like Ken was saying, moving away from the glass building. This is a concrete extrusion wrapped in aluminium. High-density urban living. This is the basic diagram of the building. Then the concept comes along that you can't go above the 8 to 12 stories in central London, and you have to remove the upper floors. You do that for the first planning consent. You then go back a year later with another 12. One has to contextualise towers. So this is us working in Docklands, which is that middle land between Canary Wharf and the city, where the tower has to be kind of linked into other elements around it. It is a local landmark. In this case, it's a 36 and a 40-storey residential tower. They're twinned, they're engaged. There again, it's only 10 flats a floor, it's about 10,000 square feet, but these two towers sit pretty much in isolation over Victorian infrastructure. So it's really a question of cutting the eye of the needle through the infrastructure of London, and then looking and justifying it as a local landmark. So you get this idea that these buildings are very specific to their context. They offer something back to the city. As you move into the city, that public immunity tends to rise up to the top of the building. It becomes the sky room that's open to the public. Although Westminster recently advised me they've got more sky rooms than they need, and they stick to keeping the buildings down at floor level. But on these outer levels, it's about cutting away and saying, actually, we can solve an infrastructural problem. We can create a new park, a new urban space. We can make new connections. We can build new bridges, metaphorically and physically, to tie together the lost lands. And this is the idea of the skin, a series of vertical things that actually move around the building, adjusting to pick up wind and shelter balconies behind. And of course, all of this makes you realise that these buildings have a life cycle. It was mentioned this morning, what is that life cycle of these buildings? This is us looking at recycling two 1960s towers. Interestingly, structural calculations such that we worked out we could add 12 floors to each of these towers to build them through. Unfortunately, London has a physical map, a glass ceiling, that prevents the rise of these buildings. But here it's just about wrapping a new, sophisticated, glazed veneer to insulated skin with a glazed finish around these towers.
I've done a lot of thinking about the building type of the tall building, especially leading up to this conference, and I was noticing that there's a lot of advancements going on in the building type in terms of exceeded heights, lots of different types of people doing tall buildings, and some environmental approaches. But altogether, I feel like there's a bit of stagnation in the tall building type, and I just wonder if we're doing our best right now to mine all the cultural, economic, and environment, especially environmental potentials that are inherent to it. Or are we just preoccupied with trying to create icons? After all, that is what all of our clients are asking us to do, which is fine, except for, when you get so many of them, is this really enough to ignite a new kind of architecture? Or is there maybe some potentially other areas where we could advance our thinking? So at this conference, we've seen that there's many new buildings being built, many new cities kind of rising up out of nothing, and wondering if these cities, which will be full of high-rises, as we've seen, we'll be able to have an identity other than the individual identities of the buildings. So I guess what I'm saying is I think that the way to break out of this pure fascination with only producing an icon is to actually start with a specific criteria, and then these iconographic forms can be developed from that. This very crude model shows these strings that it was an idea about creating these view quarters that you wouldn't normally expect. So by bumping out the facade in certain areas, you might be able to see around a corner, especially, like I say, for these lower units in the building. And we identified 6 major views of landmarks in the city that we wanted to gain for some of the units on the lower levels, which in turn created almost a topography for this tower. So it's almost like a vertical landscape. And as we developed the tower, those first bumps remained, but they got changed in terms of shape due to all of the other functions of the tower, such as the balconies and solar shading.
One thing that's worrying me, from what all the speakers have said, you've all clearly indicated a move away from iconism towards what is rapidly looking like sustainabilism. You're desperately trying to find an aesthetic. And you seem to be doing it through things like this parametric or some paraplegic software to reflect the environmental constraints onto your building to give you a design. Isn't it time we found a new sustainable aesthetic in the way Palladio did?
Who would you like to answer my question?
I think there is one where I'll start. Love any help. I think there is definitely a fashion architecture at the moment that's perhaps not just in London, I'm sure, where you feed in lots of information to computer, and without an artist touching it at all, you get a building that goes around. I think perhaps Ken and ourselves are show builders that have had starting points like that. But I think in a way, in a talk like today, one is sort of naturally editing some of the other moves that are related to old-fashioned things like proportion, materials and detail. I think all of those are there, but I think what these tools are offering us is in a way, I still see them, London's certainly struggling to know what to do with the tools that we've got at the moment. And you're quite right to say that there's a slight dilemma going on. But I think it's a very adventurous period that way, and a very exciting period. And the fact that people don't quite know the answers, the fact that some of the great architects in London, people like Norman Foster, are struggling slightly to know what to do with it as well, makes it very exciting and a very open pitch. So for me, it's sort of the beginning of a new period, certainly in London.
And I'd like to add, I think Peter's absolutely right. We are searching, and we're not that desperate yet, but we are searching for a new aesthetic. And I think that's what's so exciting about the last 4 years of Meg. We've actually had a clean slate. Green agenda's become much more to the fore. We can actually start from scratch. We haven't got a lot of history as a company we have to sort of match to. We can just start from scratch. And I think we are exploring. Every project we've done about 400, to all explore different things about the way we should be building works in the 21st century. So we haven't got the answer yet, and we probably never get the answer. We'll always be evolving, but it will come out, we'll come up with a new Palladio at some point, where then people start copying it until it goes wrong. And I think that's what's really happened is, in a way, Mises' work will be copied, the sort of essence of Mises' work for God knows how many years. I think we've got to the end of that era. We're going to look back on it and think, what the hell were we doing? Why were we putting all these glass wall space in GSAF? We must have been off our trolleys, completely crazy. No oil left. We can't habitat these protected ones. I think it's going to evolve, and if London does go up in temperature by 3 degrees in the next 50 years, it's going to change fundamentally the way we actually design buildings. If the desert moves up through France, as some people are predicting, it's going to fundamentally change the way people live and the way people work. So I think as architects, we're on this sort of new era in more ways than one to actually come up with new ways of working, new ways of design, which I think you've seen today from American architects as well.